$650 million, is that the price of your silence? Morgan. The mocking voice echoed through the gilded ballroom. Among this sea of wealthy faces, the black female CEO stood tall, her hand gripping the contract tightly. A contemptuous smile flickered across Brandon Winthrop's lips. Suddenly, every eye turned to Morgan, no one realizing that within a few hours, this humiliating scene would spread across social media, and the fate of both the Winthrop family and Morgan's reputation would be completely reversed. Who would truly pay the price of female CEO publicly humiliated among the elite, or the man who thought he could buy everything with money? If you've ever wondered, is honor really worth more than a fortune, watch until the end, because this answer is one you won't forget. Perhaps there has never been an evening when luxury felt so cold. Before me, the Winthrop mansion stood silent among the trees on the outskirts of the city, golden lights stretching from the gate all the way up to the marble steps. Luxury cars lined the driveway, and the silhouettes of servants flickered in and out of sight, like shadows in a silent theater. I walked slowly up the steps, my heels making a faint sound, each breath lingering in the chilly New York night. The grand doors opened, the space inside suddenly aglow with shimmering crystal chandeliers, the soft strains of jazz drifting through the air, but never truly inviting. Inside, dark suits, dazzling evening gowns, and indifferent gazes of the elite intertwined into an invisible web, one that both welcomed and excluded at the same time. I looked around. No one smiled a true welcome. No one asked how I was. There was only the sound of red wine filling glasses, the quiet clink of metal as half-hearted toasts were made. I hadn't even adjusted to that chilly, distant atmosphere when Brandon Winthrop's voice rose from the top of the staircase. $650 million, is that the price of your silence? Morgan? All conversation stopped. The coldness was no longer just from the marble floor, but seemed to pierce through every crystal pillar, right to my spine. I stood tall, gaze unwavering, but my heart was pounding so loud I could hear every beat in my chest. The entire room turned to look at me. Some faces were curious, others silent, but most wore that familiar, contemptuous glint. In the corner, I noticed an elderly waiter carefully holding up a tray of wine, his hands trembling. Then suddenly, a shiny button slipped from his cuff and fell onto the tile floor. The sound was soft, but in the quiet room, it rang out clear, as if to remind me that not everyone here was numb to what just happened. I bent down, picked up the button, and placed it back on his tray, brushing his hand gently in silent thanks. For a moment, my eyes met Brandon's. He raised his glass, his half-smile daring me. Not everyone here is lucky enough to be invited to a table like this. You know, some guests burst out laughing, others pretended not to hear, but I knew every single one of them was waiting to see what I would do next. I took a deep breath, straightened my lapels. True luck isn't about getting a seat at the table. It's about being able to walk away with your self-respect intact. The room froze. Someone. I could hear someone clear their throat, see a few eyes dart nervously down to their wine. That was the moment I knew everything had only just begun. Have you ever stood in a room full of people and felt like the whole world was against you? I believe it's in moments like that when you truly find out what you're worth. Right after the atmosphere froze at Morgan's answer, the party seemed to resume its rhythm, but it was only on the surface. No one in that room truly felt at ease anymore. Morgan's presence, and her directness just now, had shattered the familiar order. I heard the faint creak of leather chairs on marble as Mrs. Winthrop, the lady of the house, made her way over. Her dark blue velvet dress floated gently like a shadowy cloud, her cold eyes lined with the marks of time. She tilted her head, feigning warmth. May Carter, I must admit, very few people have the courage to wear such a simple suit to a grand occasion like this. Surely a practical and economical choice. Morgan only smiled, replying with a light thank you, revealing nothing of her feelings. But I knew, behind that smile was a wave of bitterness. An elderly investor, already talking with Brandon, leaned in as well. Impressive. I heard your company started in some garage down south. Is that right? And now you've made it here. The American dream, I suppose. The compliment sounded polite, But his eyes only held scrutiny, as if Morgan's success was just a lucky accident, a showpiece for diversity in this wealthy world. Then came Winthrop's PR director, a woman a few years younger than Morgan, fingers flicking across her phone. She smiled amiably but spoke softly, just loud enough for those at the table to hear. "They say you're amazing at winning crowds, especially with all the young people on social media. But in this world, the only thing anyone listens to is money." Right. A chill ran down Morgan's spine. Sometimes the sharpest arrows come wrapped in velvet. Here, every word, every look was a test. I watched Morgan clench her hand gently, lift her chin. No one else noticed that moment, but I know it was enough to keep her standing in the eye of the storm. There are wounds that don't bleed, yet cut deeper than any knife. And I wonder, how many of those cuts does it take to break a person? The veiled comments just now were only the prelude to a symphony of prejudice that had followed Morgan throughout her youth. Standing among dazzling dresses and cold stares, she suddenly realized that no matter how high she climbed, old wounds could flare up without warning, triggered by the slightest touch from the past. That night, I saw Morgan freeze for a moment when her eyes met a young woman, the new receptionist at Winthrop, tucked away in the corner, her name tag still gleaming. Those eyes were filled with worry, looking at Morgan with a mix of admiration and caution, as if searching for a glimmer of hope for herself. In that instant, Morgan understood her presence here was no longer just a fight for herself, but for countless people who had been dismissed because of their background, their skin, or their accent. The music shifted to a somber ballad. An elderly guest, Mr. Davidson, who once held a high office in government, quietly approached. He looked at Morgan as if he wanted to share something, then simply sighed. "Mans sur. Carter, I've seen many talented people like you falter because they didn't fit the taste of this club." It wasn't quite a warning, more a cold prediction. His words brought back a flood of memories, all the times Morgan had watched others give up halfway, worn down by the invisible walls of privilege and prejudice. She remembered the days her mother worked 2 shifts, the nights her father collapsed at the table from exhaustion, yet still urged his daughter to prove herself worthy. The times she saw her mother's tears in the kitchen after being mocked by coworkers, all of it crystallized into a silent pain. Back in the present, Morgan betrayed no weakness. She held her head high, her smile even more serene, though her palm was slick with cold sweat. A partner executive came to shake her hand, asking in a low voice just loud enough for those nearby. "Monsieur Dior, Carter, I really admire your determination, but I wonder when things get too harsh. Do you ever regret it?" Morgan answered, voice steady. "I'd regret it if I'd never tried. But if I lower my head, I'd no longer be myself." In that moment, the air was shattered again by distant laughter. Someone at the next table sneered. "I bet it won't be long before Mrs. Carter learns money's the only rule around here." The words hung in the thick air, a fresh reminder to Morgan of this harsh reality here. No one really believes in fairness. There are moments when you think you've overcome every limit, but a single sentence, a glance, can pull you right back to the starting line. I've always thought self-respect may be the source of many wounds, but it's also the one thing no one can ever take from you. As the night wore on, the party grew louder and somehow colder. Behind all the glamorous toasts and icy handshakes, the quiet divide in the room only deepened. Every eye was fixed on Morgan, not out of curiosity anymore, but as a challenge, waiting for the moment she might stumble. Morgan moved gracefully among the clusters of guests, choosing silence as her only weapon to avoid being dragged into petty conversations. Just as she was about to step outside for some air, a woman's hand gently touched her shoulder. Turning, Morgan saw a middle-aged woman in a red dress, the warmest eyes she'd met all evening. "Mr. Carter," the woman smiled softly. "I'm Ava McKenna, independent journalist." Her voice was low, spare but quietly firm. "I know it's not easy here, but there are people watching and believing in you, even if they stay silent." Ava quickly slipped a small business card to Morgan. On the back, only 4 handwritten words, "Don't let them define." No explanation, no empty encouragement. Her eyes said, "Everything I've been where you are, and I'm still here." Morgan was taken aback, feeling an invisible strength wash over her. Not everyone stands behind the powerful, and not everyone in this room compromises with injustice. Sometimes a single quiet gesture is enough to remind you there is always light, even in the darkness. Before leaving, Ava paused, speaking in a whisper. If they try to drag you down, remember there are many out there waiting to see someone stand up. The words echoed in Morgan's mind, pulling her back to her place in the midst of the lavish party. She smiled, slipping the card into her palm, suddenly not feeling so alone anymore. It's strange how a single honest word can turn an entire night around. Some allies appear in silence, yet give you the strength to finish the hardest part of the journey. As the clock in the grand hall neared midnight, the air grew heavier than at any moment before. It seemed every glance, every word, had been sharpened into one last challenge for Morgan. Just as Morgan was about to take a step back to steady herself, Brandon stepped onto the small stage in the center of the room, drawing all eyes to him. He raised his glass, his voice ringing out through the powerful crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I think tonight we should have a little surprise challenge for our special guest. Morgan Carter, if you're truly confident in what you stand for, would you care to share with us right now why should the Winthrop family place their trust in you and your project instead of anyone else? Every eye turned to Morgan. Some guests stifled laughter. Others waited, eager to see her slip on this stage of glory. Brandon's bold move wasn't just a test of nerve, but a calculated psychological blow, forcing her to reveal a weakness or make a mistake in front of the powerful. Morgan hesitated for a second. Old memories, contemptuous looks, and the cruel questions from the entire evening rushed back all at once. Her hand trembled slightly, but her gaze did not. She walked toward the stage, standing tall under dozens of scrutinizing eyes. In that moment, she didn't look at Brandon. Instead, she looked toward the young receptionist, the elderly waiter, the silent allies whose names she'd never know. Taking a deep breath, Morgan spoke briefly but firmly. I know exactly who I am. I wasn't born to sit here, and I'm not someone who gives up easily. But if you want to know why you should trust me, it's because I have never traded my principles for a handshake from anyone. A moment of silence. Then a small round of applause sounded from the back of the room, not loud, but enough to quiet the sneers. Maybe it was just one supporter, or maybe it was the first sign of change. Brandon forced a smile, trying to hide his discomfort. He stepped back, leaving Morgan alone on the stage beneath the lights, but this time she was no longer alone. Steadfastness doesn't always win you instant victory, but I believe, at the right moment, true courage is what makes everyone stop and listen. The scattered applause after Morgan's statement hadn't even faded when Brandon reclaimed center stage, as if everything so far had only been a warm-up. He stood by the microphone, eyes scanning the ballroom before settling for a long moment on Morgan's face. The crowd fell silent again, waiting for the next move. They were used to the Winthrop family's power games, but no one knew what was coming. Brandon gave a faint smile, raising his glass as if to seal the moment. Perhaps everyone here tonight wants to know why the Winthrop family should stake their future on Ms. Carter's project. But instead of promises or fleeting emotions, I want to see real substance. He turned to the board, as if making a routine announcement. Tomorrow, right here, I propose Mrs. Carter present her development strategy to the entire board and partners, no advanced preparation. If you're persuasive enough, the contract will be signed on the spot. If not, well, I think everyone will know where such beautiful dreams truly belong. A wave of whispers swept through the room, chairs shifting, glances trading barbs mixed with genuine anticipation. No one had ever seen Brandon put an opponent on the spot so publicly, especially in front of the media and the financial industry's heavyweights. A bank executive murmured, "It's like a humiliation challenge, both an opportunity and a trap." Morgan kept her composure, but inside, the undercurrents rose with every second. She knew a single misstep could see her shredded in the press, slandered across investor circles, and years of effort vanish in smoke. But she also understood retreating now would mean accepting defeat on their turf. She nodded, eyes fixed on Brandon. "If that's what you want, I won't refuse. Tomorrow morning, I'll present my plan, and all I ask is a fair chance." Silence fell again. In that moment, Morgan felt the entire mansion revolving around those watchful eyes. as if every wall knew everyone's secrets. But at the peak of tension, she noticed something strange upstairs, above the banquet tables. A small window on the second floor. A silent figure watched from above. Not a Winthrop, nor anyone on the guest list. Morgan couldn't make out who, but the sensation was clear, a silent reminder that this battle wasn't just between her and Brandon. When the party ended, Morgan stepped into the hallway. Her phone buzzed with an anonymous message. Tomorrow, don't just talk about the project, tell them who you really are. There are people still listening. She read that line over and over, suspicion swirling. Who sent it? An ally on the board, or someone testing her resolve under the pale yellow light? Morgan paused by the tall glass doors, staring at her own reflection in the shadow and glow, wondering, if everything falls apart tomorrow, will I regret having told the truth about what I've lived through? Back at the hotel, Morgan sat for hours at her desk, papers spread everywhere, but not a single line written. Her mind spun with hundreds of scenarios, old fears, the memory of her mother's encouraging smile, and the words that haunted her for years. She picked up her phone, reading again her mother's message. Your honor is never up for negotiation. If you ever have to choose between your self-respect and a contract, I hope you remember how strong you truly are. That night, the city lay silent, only the faint light outside her window and the sound of her own breathing echoing in the room. Morgan knew the biggest battle of her life lay ahead, not just to win a contract, but to protect her greatest value. There are nights longer than a lifetime, when every decision can change the future. And I always wonder, come morning, what will be left a signed contract or my pride? That night, Morgan barely slept. She sat by the hotel window, the city lights sparkling in the distance like a dream she'd never dared to reach for as a child. In her hand, she held an old silver button, the metal tarnished, the back engraved with the words, "Dignity First." Holding it, Morgan found herself drifting back to those freezing winter mornings in Chicago's South Side, where she grew up among squat brick houses and alleys thick with exhaust fumes. Morgan's mother, Evelyn, was the quintessential African-American woman of the few choices generation. She spent over 20 years cleaning houses for wealthy families, always coming home with cracked, dry hands and the scent of floor cleaner still clinging to her hair. Morgan's father worked as a mechanic at the corner garage, a gentleman who toiled year-round just to cover the rent and school fees. In that cramped apartment, Morgan grew up to the sound of soul music from an old radio and her mother's stories about Black pride, about dreams of a better life. Morgan's deepest memories were the evenings spent waiting for her mother outside the white mansion at the end of the street. Whenever there was a big party, she'd wait for hours, lips turning purple from the cold, never daring to step inside. More than once, she saw her mother's employer call her by the wrong name or deliberately ignore her as if she were invisible. One afternoon, a wealthy guest tossed a coat onto the floor, looking at Morgan's mother with a cold, flat gaze. "Clean this up and don't leave a mark." Morgan heard her mother reply, "Yes, ma'am." But as she passed her daughter, her hand quietly squeezed Morgan's small hand. Passing on a silent strength Morgan would only understand years later. At home, her mother said nothing more, just wiped the table and gently pinned the silver button onto Morgan's collar, reminding her, "Hold your head up, sweetheart. No matter what they say, we're never poor in dignity." Those words, the sound of her mother's shoes gliding across strange floors, the smell of cheap soap, the distant laughter echoing from the mansion, all of it left a mark on Morgan, forging the tough outer shell she would wear for years to come. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from those who endure the most in silence. I've always believed every early wound is a lesson, so that later on, you never bow your head to anyone. A childhood of poverty in the South Side was just the beginning of a long road Morgan knew would never be lined with red carpets. After elementary school, she became one of the few Black students to win a scholarship to the best high school in the district, a place where most of her classmates were the children of lawyers, doctors, and business owners. Those first days, Morgan remembered feeling every gaze on her, not with admiration, but as if searching for her weaknesses. More than once, at lunch, she had to sit alone at the end of the table, hearing the whispers, "Her family probably gets special funding. She's just here for her skin." Anyway, Morgan learned to answer with achievement. She threw herself into her studies, working part-time jobs at the library, coffee shops, even cleaning offices at night to earn money for books. It wasn't always easy. Some nights after work, she cried quietly in her dorm after being mocked by classmates right in the schoolyard. But Morgan never gave up. In college, she chose economics at a top public university, not because anyone pushed her, but because she knew if I'm not strong in business, I'll never be able to change anything for my family or for people like my mother. In those years, Morgan juggled school, research assistant work on small projects, and even started her own free life skills classes for kids in struggling neighborhoods. After graduation, the challenges kept coming. At her first interviews, Morgan constantly faced skepticism from hiring panels. "Oh, you used to wait tables, that must make you very patient," one bank manager joked. Another time, she was rejected in the final round because she didn't fit the company culture. Each failure was a fresh wound, but each one also steeled Morgan's resolve. The turning point came when Morgan put all her savings into starting a small tech business in her dad's old garage. Nobody believed in the chances of a young black woman, raising funds from friends and neighbors. But Morgan wasn't doing it to prove anyone wrong. She did it because she'd promised her mother, "I'll build something myself." Not to prove myself to anyone, but so I never have to bow my head to anyone again. In those first months, she could count her customers on her fingers. Morgan pressed on step by step, spending time explaining to every client, pitching her ideas at every small tech forum she could find. There were moments she wanted to give up, but every time, she looked at the silver button in her drawer, remembering her mother's words, "Dignity is not up for negotiation." Eventually, while success came, a major partner signed a contract, convinced by her persistence and integrity. From there, Morgan rose step by step, not through secret handshakes, but by ability and trust. Each small victory thickened her armor, turning Morgan into a leader not easily broken by doubt or power games. The night before the big challenge at the Winthrop estate, Morgan looked at herself in the mirror, not just a successful CEO, but the sum of a long journey of pride and determination that would never let her stop halfway. Some people ask if it's all worth it when the road is always full of challenges. All I know is if you never dare to move forward, you'll never know how strong you really are. Mornings in New York are always colder than people expect, especially when a new day begins with the biggest challenge of your life. Pale light seeped through the hotel curtains, painting a long streak across the desk where Morgan had been sitting motionless since before dawn. The sleepless night dragged on, but inside her was no longer chaos, just a rare stillness before stepping onto a new stage. This time, all the preparation would have to come from within. Morgan splashed cold water on her face, gazing into the mirror for a long time. Every small wrinkle on her forehead, every searching look reflected in the glass told the story of hundreds of hours of labor, thousands of moments of struggle, and every time she'd fallen and forced herself to get back up. She smoothed the old silver button onto her collar, gripping the keepsake as a ritual, reminding herself of her mother's words from years ago. "No matter what happens, remember, you never walk alone." At breakfast, Morgan chose something simple: black coffee, dry toast. The food had no taste, just a way to fill an empty stomach before the moment of truth. Outside the window, the city came alive with honking horns and hurried voices, a normal day, like thousands before it. Only for Morgan, everything seemed weighed between dignity and destiny. She arrived at the Winthrop mansion earlier than planned. The grand hall was still brightly lit, but now silent, tense. The echo of hurried footsteps and heels striking marble formed a soundtrack hinting at the battle about to erupt. Morgan recognized many faces from last night. Some avoided her gaze. Others offered a curt nod, while a few remained cold, waiting to see what the victim from the party would do this morning. Brandon appeared at the end of the hallway, suit sharp, smile thin as a razor. He said nothing, only gestured for Morgan to follow him into the boardroom, where the board of directors sat in 2 long rows, documents neatly stacked before them. Sunlight from tall windows fell across every face, most watching expectantly, a few skeptical, and among them, 1 or 2 quiet, supportive glances. Morgan sat down, opened her leather case, placed her documents on the table, and drew a deep, steadying breath. The ticking of the wall clock rang out, dry and harsh, snapping every anxious thought back to reality. In just a few minutes, everything would change not because of $1 million contract, but because she chose to stand up to power and prejudice. She looked around the room, reminding herself, whatever happens, I'll walk out of here with my head held high. Maybe there's nothing scarier in life than the moment you have to face yourself. But I believe whoever dares to cross that line is truly grown. Morgan walked into the boardroom, shoulders squared, gaze steady. Across from her were all the familiar faces, Brandon leaning back at the far end, arms folded with a cold stare. On the left, the aged Mrs. Winthrop with her faint, unchanging smile. To the right, board members with a mix of skepticism, indifference, and a few expressions of genuine curiosity. She knew for certain no one here was truly on her side, at least not yet. A beat of silence. Brandon spoke first, voice flat and metallic. Mr. Carter, we want to hear the real reason we should wager nearly $1 billion on someone without a single prestigious connection. If you're here just to tell fairy tales, I suggest we save everyone's time. Morgan met his gaze calmly. She didn't make excuses, didn't begin with numbers, but said simply, I'm standing here not because of luck or a well-known name. I'm here because I've worked twice as hard, faced 3 times as many rejections, and never let anyone else decide my worth. A board member smirked, twirling a pen in his hand. An older woman spoke up, her doubt barely concealed. Effort isn't enough, Ms. Carter. The market needs numbers, not feelings. Show us what's truly different. Morgan opened her documents but didn't take her eyes off Brandon. What is different here? If you want a worn-out copy of the old system, you don't need me. I'm here to change how people think about leadership, about technology, about opportunities for those who never had the right to dream. A faint cough from the far end of the table, a few glances shifting. Brandon's voice stayed icy. You talk a good game, but ideals don't pay interest. Does your company offer anything besides a pretty pitch deck? Morgan paused a moment, then answered quietly but firmly. Pretty is not what I aim for. I've built every line of code, every strategy, every partnership to prove that sometimes the hardest thing is to keep your principles when everyone wants you to sell them cheap. A younger board member leaned forward, pressing, You seem to have strong views on ethics in business. But what guarantees you won't compromise if you're pushed to the edge? Morgan's lips tightened, her eyes sharp. Because I know what it's like to have nothing left to lose and to get up from there. Someone who's been pushed to the bottom isn't easily scared by so-called risk. The air thickened with rapid-fire questions. Morgan could feel every heartbeat, every breath grow heavy, but she also knew, if she let herself tremble, all her effort would fall apart. She gripped the edge of the table, steadying her voice. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for a fair chance. If you want to check every number, I'm ready. If you just want something easy to hear, I'm not the one for you. That line gave the room pause. Just for a moment, but for Morgan, it was the instant her resolve was truly put to the test. Sometimes, just standing firm is a victory in itself. But I know the real battle is only beginning. Just minutes after Morgan's opening remarks, the tension in the boardroom grew suffocating. Brandon leaned forward, eyes sharp as a blade, determined not to miss a single chance to cut her down. Brandon spoke, drawing out each word. Mr. Carter, I want a straight answer if your plan fails. Who takes responsibility? We've seen plenty of flashy startups crumble for lack of real substance and the guts to own up. Another member, Mr. Parker, usually calm, joined in, his tone openly critical. You left your previous company citing irreconcilable differences. Was that a way to dodge responsibility, or does it show you can't fit into a large organization? Morgan didn't flinch. She looked Brandon straight in the eye, then turned to Mr. Parker, answering every word crisply. I'm not here to sell dreams. I commit to being responsible for every dollar you invest by my name, my ability, and the reputation I've spent my youth building. I left my former company because I refused to trade my values for short-term gain. Not because I was afraid of facing difficulties. Brandon looked unsatisfied, snapping his pen lightly on the table. You talk about values, about ethics. But in reality, major partners have pulled out of your company during market downturns. Why was that? Did they not trust your abilities? Or did they see something we haven't? Morgan replied, calm but unwavering. I don't blame those who left me along the way. Business isn't a place for weak feelings. But those losses made me even clearer about one thing: I'll never allow betraying those who believed in me. At that point, Mrs. Winthrop suddenly cut in. If that's so, why fight so hard for this contract? What matters most to you, money, or proving yourself to the financial world? Morgan paused for a brief second, then answered slowly. Money will always keep a company alive, but it won't make it last. I came this far because I believe the greatest change isn't in the value of the contract, but in who's brave enough to break the old rules. One board member nodded, and others exchanged glances for the first time. Some seemed to be leaning toward Morgan's side, but Brandon wasn't finished. He smirked, sliding a file toward her. Can you explain why your project is priced above the market average? Is that overconfidence or a lack of realism? Morgan took the file, glanced through it, then answered steadily. Because I'm not selling a product. I'm selling a solution. And that solution is big enough to transform the very system you're holding on to. The room's tension peaked, but Morgan realized she no longer felt afraid the way she did at first. Each question, each challenge, only made her steadier. She understood this was the final test to prove her true worth. Pressure isn't always meant to break you. It shows you how strong you've become. And I know the more you're pushed to the edge, the more you have to stand firm. The air in the boardroom grew heavier as Morgan finished her last answer. Glancing around, she saw a few board members starting to lean her way, while the rest stayed cautious or neutral. Brandon, though trying to look composed, now showed sharp, calculating eyes. Just as Morgan prepared to present her final slide, the one she believed was her strongest, Brandon abruptly cut in, his voice cold as ever. I'm going to stop you there. Carter, before we go any further, there's a serious matter the board needs to clarify. He pulled a thick stack of papers from his file, sliding them toward Morgan and the entire board. We've just received a report from an independent partner. According to this, your company was implicated last year in a data fraud case during beta product testing. I want an explanation right now. Before the board, or from this point on, there's nothing more to discuss about this contract. A wave of whispers swept the room. Some board members bent their heads to confer. Others stared at Morgan with suspicion. In that instant, Morgan felt a rush of dizziness, a chill up her spine. She'd heard ugly rumors before, but never imagined she'd be ripped apart right in front of the board at such a decisive moment. Brandon didn't stop, pressing his attack. For me, the most important thing isn't skill or passion, it's transparency. Everyone here knows I don't take ethical risks lightly for the sake of empty promises. If Carter can't answer satisfactorily, I propose we end this meeting right now. A female board member spoke up, voice sharp. Can you deny these accusations? Because if you can't, every achievement you've claimed means nothing. Morgan felt her throat tighten. No one spoke up for her. No encouragement now, no friendly glances, only pressure, doubt, and that thin line between trust and collapse. Regaining her composure, Morgan answered briefly, controlling each breath. I know about this rumor. My company was once sabotaged by a former partner who manipulated test data to hurt us in the market. As soon as we discovered it, we were transparent, requested independent audits, and fully cooperated with investigators. All findings have been made public. If you need, I can present the entire dossier here. Some board members hesitated, but Brandon refused to let up. He looked around, delivering one last blow. Evidence can come later. But if that transparency doesn't happen at the right moment, what's left of trust, Carter? Who do you think we should bet on? Someone who only talks ideals, or someone who truly controls all risk? Morgan fell silent. Her mother's words, childhood wounds, all came flooding back. She knew even the smallest mistake could wipe out all her efforts. Just one board member's objection, and every door would slam shut. A second stretched like a lifetime. Under the table, Morgan's hands clenched tight. Her eyes locked on Brandon, not pleading, but defiant. Trust can't be proven in a single meeting. But if you want to judge me by a mistake I didn't make, then I have nothing left to lose here. No one answered. The atmosphere grew more stifling than ever. Morgan knew this was the most fragile moment of her life and the ultimate limit of what a person can bear. Sometimes a single accusation is enough to make you a stranger to your own achievements. But I understand unless you face the truth, even when it's cruel, you'll never truly grow. The atmosphere seemed frozen. Every whisper, every page turn, every soft tap of a pen vanished after Morgan's final words. The board sat in awkward silence, many eyes fixed on Brandon for the next signal. As for Morgan, though her heart pounded in her chest, she somehow kept a strange, calm composure, as if she was ready to accept any outcome. At that moment, a voice rang out from the corner, breaking the long silence. If the board permits, I'd like to make a statement. Everyone turned to see Ava McKenna, the independent journalist who had quietly appeared at the party, now present as a communications advisor to a board member. Ava spoke slowly but firmly. I've just received a video from one of the waitstaff at last night's event. It shows a truth I believe everyone should see before making any final decision. She nodded to her assistant, who played the video on the large screen. The footage showed Brandon, amid the crowd, blatantly insulting Morgan, deliberately attacking her dignity in front of the guests. This was no longer rumor or hearsay. Every eye, every mocking word was captured clearly on camera. The board was stunned. Some members gasped. A few tapped on their phones. Hands began to whisper astonishment down the table. Ava continued, each word resolute. We've become too used to using power to create pressure, to make others fall just for daring to be different. But the truth can't stay buried forever. The question now isn't just who we believe, but whether we have the courage to set a standard for justice, even if the one in power turns out to be the one at fault. Brandon shot to his feet, his face drained, eyes darting furiously around the room. He stammered some weak protest, claiming the video was edited, the context incomplete, but no one cared anymore. For the first time, a senior board member broke their neutrality. We don't judge a project only by numbers or rumors, but also by how its leader faces adversity and treats those with less power. Here, the truth is obvious. A volley of questions now targeted Brandon. Some members proposed suspending all his decision-making authority until a full investigation was completed. Morgan stood silent before the board. She knew this moment would forever change the meaning of dignity, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever stayed silent in that room. When asked for closing remarks, Morgan simply said, I didn't come here to bargain with my dignity. If a major contract is built on injustice, I'm ready to walk away, but I will never trade what I believe is right, no matter the price. The boardroom fell utterly silent. A few members quietly nodded. The sunlight from the windows seemed brighter, chasing away some of the darkness that had filled the room. Sometimes, the truth appears at the very moment you're about to break. And I understand if you keep your integrity until the end, every power game will eventually collapse on its own. As soon as the video ended, the board nearly erupted in a chorus of outraged whispers. The head of the board, Mr. Lawrence Gray, a silver-haired businessman in his 60s, couldn't hide his disappointment, staring coldly at Brandon before addressing the entire room. Who are we if we allow power to be used as a weapon to diminish someone's dignity? He said, his voice steady but resolute. I propose that, effective immediately, Brandon Winthrop be suspended from all decision-making authority on the board until the investigation is complete. This is not just about one person, it's about the honor of our entire organization. Brandon tried to protest, but his voice was weak, lost in the determined atmosphere. Some board members nodded emphatically, others whispered to each other, but no one dared defend Brandon now. His face shifted from anger to confusion to defeat for the first time. Brandon no longer controlled anything around him. At that moment, the boardroom doors swung open, and a wave of reporters and media staff rushed in. Cameras turned on the board, on Morgan, the woman who, just last night, was the target of cruel jokes. A barrage of questions filled the air. Will the board issue a public apology to Miss Carter? One, the Shota Sewer. What do you say about a leader being the first to violate business ethics? Do you plan to sue the Winthrop Group for defamation? Morgan remained silent, but for the first time, Mrs. Winthrop stepped forward to stand beside her. She faced the reporters, her eyes sincere. We apologize for letting this go too far. No one deserves such disrespect, especially someone who has given their all like Miss Carter on Mirinatermin. The board will take official action to ensure fairness, transparency, and restore trust. Outside, guests who had stayed silent the night before now bravely addressed the press. A young entrepreneur who'd kept quiet at the party now took the mic and declared, "Today I witnessed not just a project defended, but a person who held on to dignity and principles despite immense pressure. Mewis. Carter has given us new faith in how business should be done." Amid scattered applause, Morgan finally met genuine recognition and agreement, not because she was the victim, but because she stood up and refused to back down in the face of injustice. Sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to speak the truth to change an entire system. But I know real change only begins when everyone raises their voice. Every camera lens was fixed on Morgan, waiting for her decision, the woman once buried beneath ridicule, now the center of recognition and hope. The room seemed to freeze as she stood beneath the lights, all eyes pressed, bored, onlookers waiting for her final answer. Morgan looked straight at the board, her voice low but ringing clear, with no need to dramatize. "I didn't come here asking for sympathy or to turn myself into a victim. If I win this contract today only because people feel guilty, then it means nothing. I want an agreement based on transparency and fairness, and a real commitment to ethics from Winthrop." She paused, letting her gaze sweep the board members. "If you agree, I propose that the contract include explicit clauses on anti-discrimination policy, transparency in all decision-making, and a guarantee that no abuse of power will be tolerated regardless of who is involved." The room buzzed, then nods appeared, one by one. Mr. Lawrence Gray, the board chairman, was the first to speak. "We agree. Starting today, Winthrop will officially revise its internal code as you propose and launch an independent investigation into all past misconduct." As his answer ended, the boardroom broke into sustained applause. TV reporters broadcast every moment live. Social media commentators dubbed it "the day justice spoke." A wave of support swept in from young people, small business owners, and advocacy groups across the city. After the meeting, Morgan stepped outside into a crowd of reporters. She didn't boast or gloat, she simply thanked everyone, repeating once more before the cameras, "True victory isn't signing the biggest contract, but keeping your dignity and inspiring the next person to stand up." Beyond the boardroom, hundreds greeted Morgan with looks of respect. Young people came forward to shake her hand, share their own stories, and thank her for clearing the path for a new generation. In Morgan's eyes shone a quiet happiness she'd spent years searching for, not bought with money, but built on self-respect and genuine recognition. It may take a lifetime to realize success doesn't always show up on a scoreboard. Sometimes, it's when you hold on to who you are, no matter how fierce the storm. 1 week after the storm, the atmosphere at Winthrop headquarters was completely transformed. The company nameplate was replaced just beneath the classic silver logo. A new slogan appeared in bold letters: dignity, equity, truth. It was a promise of change the board could no longer deny. In the main hall, small posters on equality, transparency, and ethical conduct lined the walkways. Gone was the old shadow of power that forced others to bow their heads. In its place were groups of young employees, many who had quietly endured prejudice, now standing tall, exchanging ideas, proposing new community programs they'd never dared dream of before. That same week, Winthrop announced the appointment of 2 new board members, a Latina tech expert and a social activist who'd grown up in Brooklyn's poorest neighborhoods. The decision sparked positive debate. Media called it the first real breakthrough in a financial industry, long known for its closed doors. Handwritten notes and thank you emails poured into Morgan from Winthrop staff. One read, "Because of you, for the first time I dared to speak out about how I was treated. Thank you for helping us believe that even a small voice can change something big." On social media, the video of the public board apology and Morgan standing strong through the storm was shared again and again. Hashtags like "Dignity Matters" and "Change Starts" here spreading fast. Other companies joined in, signing pledges for fair workplaces and the press called it a new milestone for the entire industry. The change wasn't just in the C-suite. In the cafeteria, people who'd once been nervous now spoke openly, colleagues shaking hands instead of just nodding from a distance. A spirit of equality still new, but real had begun to take root. Not everyone can change a system, but when one person dares to start, even the impossible can begin. In the months that followed, the name Morgan Carter appeared across major newspapers, not as the victim of a corporate scandal, but as a new symbol of integrity, self-respect, and transformative strength. Morgan received countless invitations to speak at universities, nonprofits, and startup events, but she always declined hollow honors. What mattered to Morgan were real conversations, where she could listen, share her story, and pass on some of the resilience she'd forged over the years. At a young entrepreneurs conference, a Black female student approached Morgan after the crowd had left. Her voice was soft, but her eyes steady. "I almost dropped out when a former teacher told me, 'Women like you can't be leaders.' But after following your story, I didn't give up. I started standing up for myself, and now I've just landed my first internship at a major company." Morgan didn't answer right away. She just squeezed the girl's hand, quietly encouraging her, "Don't let anyone else define your limits. If you believe in yourself, any door can open." To many, Morgan became a role model, but she never called herself a symbol. She refused superficial awards, quietly accepted mentorship roles for social startups, and helped young people from disadvantaged backgrounds find their own voice. One late afternoon, Morgan left a small classroom she'd just finished sharing with a group of disabled students and immigrant youth. Walking the city's noisy sidewalks, Morgan no longer felt she had to prove anything. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes showed a rare peace, the look of someone who'd finally found herself in a world full of storms. Sometimes the greatest achievement isn't a title, but realizing you've helped someone believe in themselves. Even just one person can be enough to change a life. Do you remember what it felt like when Morgan's dignity was made into a joke? Or that moment she chose to confront injustice instead of bowing her head like so many others? We believe there's a Morgan inside everyone ready to defend the truth, even if it means standing alone. So, if it were you, what would you do when faced with a choice between silence and your own self-respect? Have you ever experienced a moment like that at work, in school, or even in your own family? Share your story, thoughts, or message in the comments below. If this video meant something to you, send it to a friend who needs inspiration, tag them here, or spread it on social media with the hashtag Unveiled Wealth. And don't forget to hit subscribe to the Unveiled Wealth channel to join us. Listen and help create small changes, because every story, every share can give strength to thousands of others. Thank you for watching. See you again in the next journeys of Unveiled Wealth, where every value is revealed, retold, and nothing needs to be hidden.